Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. And what is a Gentleman's Guide to the World of Darkness is kind of a Gentleman's Guide to Digimon. That was news to me as well. And a brand new video idea, courtesy of a subscriber and customer and fan by the name of Twilord. That's their handle. Now, Twilord, who I'm sure will watch this video, thank you very much, by the way, Twilord, picked up a copy of The World Below in hardcover. Now, you know how this goes. If you pick up The World Below RPG, which is a subterranean fantasy RPG with a lot of World of Darkness DNA sprinkled in there, you basically can contact me through MatthewDawkins.com if you picked up a hard copy through DriveThruRPG or BackerKit. Both are linked below. And request a video. Just send me your order number and request a video on any topic, pretty much, and I will cover it for you. So, it turns out Twilord is a big Digimon fan. I already knew this. They and I have spoken together in the past about Digimon RPG, TTRPG. I know very little about Digimon, it has to be said. I am not a fan, player, enthusiast. I know of it, I'm interested in it, but that's about as far as it goes. But Twilord knows a lot, and is a big enthusiast for Digimon, and wanted to know how it may be layered into the World of Darkness. Twilord sent me 6 different potential topics that I could cover in this video that intersect Digimon and the World of Darkness, and my favourite of the topics was how would you approach the idea of familiars in the World of Darkness as a splat, as a playable option. Because Digimon, and I know that the vast majority of people will immediately associate it with Pokemon, and I don't think that's a bad reference point from how I've looked into it, in the sense that you have these monsters or spirits or ephemeral beings that are attached to their tamer or master or owner or employer, depending on, I guess, what kind of game you're looking at. And there is often some kind of resurrection-based mechanic that these creatures don't die permanently unless they are either absorbed by others of their kind before they can resurrect, or unless their master dies. It's very familiar-based. Now, not all of that is going to be true across all of these universes, these Digimon, Pokemon, and so on. But certainly in the way of familiars for the World of Darkness, that's how I would be orienting it. Let's look, first of all, what a familiar is and the way they function. So familiars, I think, when most people imagine them, imagine like a witch's cat, an animal that is bound to a magical master and has been given some kind of elevated sentience by that master. With it, that creature is able to potentially cast spells, spy, attack, that kind of thing. And if you want, in the World of Darkness, you could, if you're feeling very cruel, describe a ghoul as a vampire's familiar, because they follow that same procedure of they require the master's vitality, in a way, to survive, and what's more, they will live forever, just so long as the master keeps feeding them their vitae. And so, in a sense, a ghoul is a bipedal familiar, which is a very disturbing thought when you think about it. And ghouls are already a playable option in Vampire the Masquerade. But I don't want to focus on ghouls, because that's already been done. And I feel it would be more fun to look at a different part of almost all of the splats, the core books in the World of Darkness, and say, well, what would a familiar be from that game line? So that you could then form, we're going to just call it a clutch of familiars. That's our coterie, our pack, and so forth. We've got a clutch of familiars. And each one has got to be tied to a different game line. So, for example, and we're going to be going little off the beaten track in this video. For example, werewolf has a very natural familiar base to pull from in the form of spirits. You will have spirits that are loyal or in service to their werewolf masters, and spirits have enough of their own wherewithal. They can apply their own agency. This is where ghouls, I think, sometimes lack. They are often completely brainwashed. Spirits will have their own agency, their own feelings, their own thoughts. They may be loyal to their masters, but they have enough freedom to think. And if we treat the spirit as a familiar to a werewolf, in that case, they can come in a huge number of varieties. You can be spirits of emotions, of events, actions. You will probably be very familiar with the idea of Banes in Werewolf the Apocalypse, and similar in Werewolf the Forsaken. Spirits are a very big part of both of those games. So I think you could have spiritual-based familiars from Werewolf the Apocalypse. Now, when it comes to something like Demon the Fallen, well, that's where you could have something like imps, a smaller, more... And this is a very traditional form of familiar. Different kinds of fiendish creature, and they don't all have to be fiendish. Some of them could be, tiny, almost angelic-like creatures. But I think, by nature, while spirits are going to have incredibly, almost raw elemental powers that are tied to their genesis, imps are going to be the kind of splat you play if you're going for more tricks and pacts and curses and the like. So there's more of a hex feel to having an imp. That is their role in the game as part of the clutch, for example. So while a spirit is likely to be primarily mental or physical, an imp is more likely to be social, I would say. Changelings, I am tempted. I don't think there's anything in Changeling the Dreaming that really works as a familiar, but I think this is where you could actually pull in genuine fairies. I mean fairies, Faeries. This is fairy tale fairies, as in positive fairy tale fairies. And now they can be tricksters as well. But they can also be charmers. They can be spies. They are diminutive. They're so small. This is your Tinkerbells, essentially. And I could very well imagine that would be their sobriquet in this game. The nickname for fairies, they would be known as Tinkerbells, which would be amusing if you have a red cap Tinkerbell, because this is going to be this miniature knife-wielding maniac that's flying up to people. Quite like Puppet Master in a way, the series of horror movies. Yeah, actually, I quite like that as a changeling familiar. Animated puppets. I mean, that you could actually make that a Wraith thing. Yeah, let's keep the puppets, because I was going to go for something else for Wraith, but I'm actually more tempted to put something in often animated puppet form. And it's also good to have these familiars take on primarily physical roles. Even the spirits should be tangible. One of the big issues of having any kind of playable splat primarily incorporeal is it very literally puts them on a different plane to other creatures, requires a different damage system, that kind of thing. So we've got our fairies for the changelings. Now things get a little more nebulous, or they're ideas that require a little more building upon. But for Wraith, I would go for something I would call vestiges. So this would tie to the Wraith the Oblivion setting, the idea that the guilds have discovered ways of weakening one's shadow. Essentially, they are shaving aspects of the shadow from the Wraiths, knocking away the calluses, chipping those bits off. Those are your vestiges, and the vestiges end up incorporating themselves. The only way they can survive, instead of just spreading out and being absorbed by Oblivion, is if they find something to manifest into. And so this is where you get your haunted puppets. We mentioned Puppet Master. This is where you could have, any kind of... I've always been a big fan of the animated ventriloquist dummy. I mean, that's probably on a larger side, but if we're thinking of familiars as... And they don't all have to be small and pocket-sized. There's a lot of Digimon, it seems, that are pretty fucking big. But I think, for familiarity's sake, we're not looking right now as anything taller than a human, for example. But vestiges is our familiars for our wraiths. Sometimes they're going to help the wraiths, sometimes they're going to hinder the wraiths, but the most important thing with familiars is ultimately they are trying to look out for the wraith or any of these major splats' main interests. Obviously, shadows often believe they are when they're degrading the wraith. One of my favourite aspects of Wraith is how a shadow may have the best of intentions, or may think that it does, when it's just driving you into becoming a spectre. So vestiges, and I really like that puppet master idea, so let's put them there. Now, I'm a little hazier when it comes to mage and vampire. Not because I don't have ideas, but I'm not sure what I would stress specifically as perfect for familiars. For vampire, because I've already ruled out ghouls, I would be very tempted to actually make them the blood dolls. Because you have ghouls who are addicted to blood, you've got blood dolls who are addicted to being fed upon. And so it's a different kind of symbiosis. And what's more, I still think you can have that addictive quality, that loyalty to master, which is born less from a drug addiction and more from almost a lust-filled obsession. Blood dolls are going to be very crafty because they're going to be desperate to get what they want, but they're also going to be prone to, if not frenzy, manic behavior. I think that's your real unstable option in this group, the blood doll. They're also the ones who are most likely to appear human out of all of the options I've just listed, but they're going to have all the access to resources that humans have access to. Having blood dolls as vampires familiars, so people who are addicted to being fed upon and want to service the vampires who give them such pleasures, is a really twisted kind of familiar. But there's a lovely delineation. I could very well see a rivalry starting, and hell, you could have ghouls as one of the chief antagonists in this game, because ghouls would look at these blood dolls and think, you know, essentially you are stepping on my territory. You're trying to win Master's favour. Master belongs to me. So you could get some lovely passion plays out of that kind of thing. Now, Mage is, as I say, where I've got the weakest ideas, because mages can be much of anything, and their powers can do much of anything. I think this is where we really want to get homunculus-like. We want to get our artificial life forms, our Frankenstein's monsters. We could indeed have animalistic familiars, but I don't think that's really in keeping with the vast majority of traditions. And of course, if you have the technocracy, or the virtual adepts, or the Sons of Ether, that's where you are actually going to get genuine Digimon-style creatures that could be spirits bound to metallic frames. It could well be organically grown alien creatures that, for all intents and purposes, look like digital monsters, but are in fact just the manifestations of your magic. How you would package that away as something other than vulgar magic, I suppose, would depend on entirely how these Digimon appear in the world of darkness. I don't think you could get away with, let's say, having a robotic Tyrannosaurus rampaging around the city, but you could definitely do so with, and robotics is advancing, with household robots. I know not all Digimon are robots, mind you, but I think let's keep the concept simple right now. Now, what is the purpose of these splats? Other than coming up with ideas for them, brainstorming what kind of familiars we might have here, we need a raison d'etre, which is beyond just service. I think the standard arc of gameplay is that your characters are the ignored. They are the supernatural type in the world of darkness who flies under every single radar. When you're having to deal with worm spirits, nexus crawlers, elders, Nefandi and the like, you're not looking at the small fairies, the malicious-looking puppets, or indeed the elemental, the spiritual aspect of pollution that's following you around. But those are our playable characters. So being under the radar is where we exist. We are in an underworld beneath the world of darkness. Not literally, but figuratively. And that then gives us the arc of wanting recognition, wanting to be seen as a true monster, perhaps. You actually want to be recognized as a threat. So that builds up an interesting gameplay system where you have to marry your loyalty to your master, because that needs to be that's an integral part of your familiar, to wanting to be perceived as significant. So the two are often going to clash, because the more powerful you become, the more your master potentially is going to want to resent you, lower your powers, throw you in a cupboard and lock away the key. Or indeed lock you in a cupboard and throw away the key. That would work too. I think you would also want an arc based on service, which will entail spying, assassination, performing duties for your master that your master believes is beneath them or too dangerous for them. But there needs to be some kind of connection where the master isn't just going to be throwing you into annihilation every single time. Familiars in fantasy as well as in this game, if the familiar is taken out, the master is going to take a hit from it. The master is weakened for enough time that his enemies could take advantage. So the master will need to have some kind of sympathetic relationship with you for you to exist and for them to want to intervene and save you. But what you'd want to avoid with, we'll call it familiar the serving. Well, I don't know. Well, right now the splat is going to be called Familiar, because it's got to be, hasn't it? It is the World of Darkness. And Familiar the Familiarity. Alright, that's the best I can do at short notice. That's the one part of this video I wasn't thinking about in advance, is what I would call this game. But with all of that put together, every single one of our splats here, our familiars, could have a very interesting range of abilities. For the time being, I'm suggesting we are just going to call them charms in the same way as exalted, because it implies almost a lower level of power to words like discipline and gift and spheres and so on. Charms feels more subtle, and I think that even as their power grows and they become more distinct and destructive potentially, our familiars always seem to be subservient. They always seem to be weak. And because this is the World of Darkness, we need the dark aspect of what happens when the familiar overpowers the master. And I think we need that as our top level in the Familiarity, where there are some familiars who have become so strong that now they are the puppet masters. They are the ones who command the former masters, and the relationships are reversed, which means your protagonist familiars, some of them may aspire to it, some of them may see this as completely anathema, and those are the kinds of monsters you desperately want to take down. You cannot allow them to persist. I think that could be a lot of fun. So anyway, this is all just spitballing. In terms of the resurrection idea, I am a big fan of, and this gets very dark again when you look at Blood Dolls, the idea that they just cannot die until their masters either release them or until their masters expire. And with something like a Blood Doll, that isn't going to be the same as a ghoul rapidly aging. The Blood Doll is so emptied of purpose once their master dies that they probably become suicidal. The more magical of our familiars, like a spirit, will return to the wider spirit world, the Umbra. A vestige, if the wraith dies, may actually just become part of the spectre that the wraith becomes. An imp returns to hell. A fairy maybe just flits off to find another master. I think you could have different fates for each one, but until the master is dead, or until the master releases them, they are bound to keep returning to servitude. A Blood Doll inexplicably wakes up on the slab, and that it becomes more of a horror aspect where Blood Doll doesn't heal in the same way as other people. The Blood Doll is not a ghoul, does not have magical vitae in their body, and so when they wake up in the slab, they still have all their open wounds. They still look absolutely hideous, and they are having to deal with the fact that somehow their heart just keeps starting again, but their body will not die no matter what horrible things occur. That could be very fun and very dark. So while this isn't Digimon in the traditional sense, you asked me how I would incorporate familiars into the world of darkness. That is what I would do. I'd make it seem like they're small, they're trivial, they're petty, they're slaves. They have no will of their own. But then, when you get to know what these creatures are capable of, what their dreams are, what they hope to achieve, then the game can become particularly nasty, which is, I think, the big desire out of any World of Darkness game. You want a seam of nastiness that bleeds all the way through it. Well, I hope that has answered your question, Twilord, as to how I would do it, and thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for the request, and if anybody else wants a video, by all means pick up a hard copy of The World Below RPG, message me through MatthewDawkins.com, and make your video request. See you next time.